Hey everybody, it's Nikki and welcome back to another video. Today's video is going to be my diagnostic journey from start to finish of my MALS, SMAS, Nutcracker syndrome, and Thurner syndrome diagnoses. So we're going to start at the very beginning. I have never actually shared this story on my channel before because it's really hard for me to unpack, because the events leading up to this diagnosis were very traumatic, and I'm going to do my best to unpack this with you here. And I feel like it's good for me to process because I'm kind of the type of person to just shove things down and not want to think about them, or I overthink about them. And so I feel like I've done a bit of both on this whole journey, but I feel like it's time to share this diagnosis story, and hopefully it helps some of you out there who are also on your own diagnostic journey, and hopefully it can bring you encouragement and maybe some wisdom as well in your own story. So we're going to start off at the beginning. So my story starts 3 years ago, or I guess maybe it starts a bit before that. So I have had GI issues my entire life. I have always struggled with stomach pain, nausea, constipation, and bloating, and a bunch of other issues. When I was in high school, I thought it was normal to feel sick after eating. I thought everybody felt that way, and I just thought that that was normal. Come to find out years later that that is not normal, and not everybody feels sick after eating. And so in trying to figure out why, the first thing that we kind of started off with is maybe I had a food intolerance. So I started off by cutting out lactose and gluten were kind of like the first ones that I started cutting out. And I felt like that had made a difference. And then there were also a few other foods that I had cut out at the very beginning of my story. So this would have been back in like 2019 when I started cutting out foods to try and figure out why I felt so sick after eating. So again, that was lactose and gluten were first, and then I ended up adding corn products and pork as well. And so I had a couple of years where I felt better, but still not great. I still felt sick after eating often, and I just kind of brushed it off and went along with my everyday life, because at that point I had gained back the weight that I had lost before, when I thought I had food intolerances and stuff like that. And so I wasn't worrying about it too much. But the thing is, it took me a really long time to gain back. At that point, I had only lost 10 pounds, and it took me a really long time to regain those 10 pounds. Like, it took me 2 years to regain those 10 pounds by eating orally. And I was doing all the right things. So I, during that time, was seeing an iridologist to figure out, like, health-wise, like where things were at in my body, and trying to figure out supplements that I could take to strengthen my body and to help with my gut health and other issues that I was having, because at this point I wasn't diagnosed with anything except for maybe endometriosis, and so we didn't really know what was going on in my body. So that was kind of the very, very beginning. But come 2022, I am a newlywed. It literally begins on my wedding night. I used to get like these really bad stomach episodes where I would just feel very sick, and sometimes I would be sick, and it would last for hours and hours and hours, and it would be very aggressive. And I didn't actually know what the cause was of that, but I had one on my wedding night, and Matt and I did end up in the ER that night, not once but twice, because the first time we were just dismissed, and so when I started to feel like a tiny bit better, then we just left the ER. But then as soon as we got back to our place, then I started to feel unwell again, and we ended up having to go back, and I was given fluids and nausea meds at that point. So I kind of thought that maybe that was a one-off. Maybe I was just dehydrated from a really long day and dealing with chronic illnesses that I didn't know that I had at that point. So we didn't really think too much about it, but I continued to have episodes throughout our honeymoon and going forward from that point on. I would have very severe sickness episodes after eating. I would feel very unwell, and something about me is I have emetophobia. So if you don't know what that is a fear of vomiting. And so my body doesn't just vomit, it fights off vomiting for hours. And so even when I've mentally already prepared for that, my body still won't. And so I can be at a level 10 nausea, literally gripping the throne and just waiting for it, and nothing will happen. But once it does happen, I cannot stop. And so I was having episodes like that, and it would end up with us in the ER getting nausea meds and fluids because I could not control them at home. And this was happening frequently, so I was missing work often. At this point, I was working a full-time job outside of my home as a receptionist. And I felt that it was very unfair to my coworkers who were having to cover for me because they weren't the receptionist, and we only had one receptionist, me, and then they had a couple of people who were backup to answer phones if I wasn't there or if I was on lunch break, but it wasn't technically their job. And so I felt very bad when I had to miss so many days recovering from these flares, and ultimately because I was getting pretty bad and it was getting to a point where it was getting hard to eat. This was at the very, very beginning of this too. It was only a month in of being married, and also of having very severe episodes where I would end up in the ER. So I decided to quit my job, and I was fortunate enough to be given a part-time position with my in-laws as a as an admin. And so that is what I do even currently to this day, and it's more flexible for my body and for my health, and that's what I've been doing ever since this. So I quit my job and was trying to figure out what was wrong. So I was losing weight, I was having these constant episodes, I was finally given nausea meds that they were giving me in the ER anyways to take at home so that I wouldn't have to go to the ER, but I was still having so many episodes where it was just really difficult to manage, and I was in so much pain and having so much nausea. Eating was becoming very difficult. I went from being able to eat a normal size portion to then it was a half size portion to then it was just a baby size portion, and this is of solid food, so it was still normal food at this point, but I was still having so many episodes and I did not know the cause. And I had gone to my doctor requesting to see a dietitian and to see a GI because I was I'm losing weight and I can't eat and I'm so nauseous and I'm in so much pain. And he just kind of brushed me off because he was a really bad doctor. And unfortunately, he was my primary care. And so I had no choice but to see him over and over and over again throughout this whole experience. And so I ended up having to wait 6 months to get in with a dietitian. And so by the time she saw me, I had already lost 15 to 20 pounds at that point and was barely, I wasn't really tolerating solids very much at that point anymore. And she was so what she told me was, I think that if you would have come to see me, if you would have been able to get in and see me sooner, we might have been able to help you gain the weight back, but now you've progressed so far that there really wasn't anything that she could do. And she even told me if it ever happens again to just call directly to make an appointment with her instead of having to wait for a referral through my doctor because I was that severe. And unfortunately, I had to just stop seeing her because it was very discouraging for me to constantly show up to another appointment with her and be like, I'm not tolerating this food. I'm not tolerating this method that you've asked me to do. I'm barely tolerating solids. I couldn't really tolerate high fat or high protein meals, and I was still losing so much weight, and I just felt so terrible. And at this point, I also just felt so crazy, mentally, because I hadn't yet seen the GI, and everyone that I had seen up until that point, kind of just made me feel like I had an eating disorder. So oftentimes I would force myself to eat more food than I could tolerate, which would trigger an episode just to prove to myself that I actually wanted to eat. And it wasn't because I was starving myself, but because I was actually in that much pain after eating. And I ultimately quit seeing my dietitian because not that she was making me feel that way, but I just felt like I was failing at doing what she wanted me to do, which was gain weight. And because I could not, and it was out of my control, I just had to quit for my own sanity and mental health at that point. And so finally, a couple months after seeing her, I was able to get in with the GI. And so the GI, I didn't really feel like she understood me, even from the beginning. So she booked a couple of tests for me. She booked like 2 tests, like she did an endoscopy, and then when the endoscopy didn't really show anything, then she booked me for a gastric emptying scan, because at that point I was thinking maybe this is gastroparesis, because at that point I was diagnosed EDS and POTS, so that was like kind of in the first year of these episodes and everything. I was like, maybe this is gastroparesis, it's pretty common in EDS and POTS, so maybe that's what it is. And so I had a gastric emptying scan, and when that came back normal, I was so like confused. I was like, maybe it was done wrong, which it was done wrong. You're supposed to do the test for 4 hours, and they only did it for 2 hours, and I also couldn't eat more than like a quarter of the food. So it was like a plate of eggs with radioactive stuff in it, and then I had brought my own gluten-free toast, and then there was like water as well. And I think I had 2 sips of the water, I had a couple bites of toast, and then tried to get down at least like a third of the eggs. And I was in pain for days after that. And so at that point, my GI just wanted to brush everything off as functional dyspepsia, wanted to say that it was just constipation related, and that she didn't know what to do for me. But I broke down in her office, and I was like, you need to do more for me. I know that something is wrong, and you need to keep looking, because I'm not giving up on myself here. And so as a last-ditch effort, she gave me a CT enterography. And so that test was going into 2024 at that point is where we were at. And at this point, I was barely tolerating anything. And I had lost 30 pounds at this point. And so the CT enterography, basically you had to go, and at this place that I was at, they made you drink Go Lightly, which is colonoscopy prep, so that it would like swell up your intestinal tract basically with fluid, so that they could see things more clearly. And so I was supposed to drink 3 large cups of fluid, and they wanted me to do it in 15 minutes. That did not happen. It took me an hour to get down 2 cups, and they did give me metoclopramide at the very beginning. If they wouldn't have given me that, I would have struggled even more than I already was with drinking this fluid, and it was brutal. But I had that test done, and that phone call was like the most validating experience that I had in this whole journey. It was the first test to show SMAS and Nutcracker syndrome. But at this point, so my GI told me I've only ever seen 5 cases my whole career, and I really don't know much about it. And so she basically was sending me for another test, which was a barium swallow test, which was very frustrating to me because okay, let me explain what this is. So you go for basically this x-ray, and you swallow barium, and they like watch it. But I am decently sure it was done wrong, because I've read the report and it didn't say anything about the intestine at all. It only talked about my esophagus and my stomach, which, if you know what SMAS is, it affects the intestine. And if you're not even commenting on the intestine, how are you diagnosing something based off of that? So they had told me at that point that I didn't have SMAS because everything was normal. And something inside of me just felt like I shouldn't stop looking. that I should continue to pursue that route of compressions, just because it really did fit all of my symptoms. And I had joined support groups at that point to try to make sense of my experience and to learn about these conditions and learn about proper testing protocols and everything like that, and continue to push my doctors for more. So even though they were trying to dismiss me and say that I didn't have MALS, that I didn't have SMAS, that they thought I just had Nutcracker phenomenon, so I had pushed my GI to send me to a vascular surgeon, and to a few other places. During that time, when I also had the CTE, I had actually reached out to a surgeon in the States for a second opinion, because Canadian doctors on this topic were not getting anywhere. And so I had an opinion in the States, and he said that it definitely sounded like I had SMAS and MALS, but how he wanted to proceed was to do testing in Canada and have my Canadian doctors send all of the information and imaging to him in the States. And so that's kind of what I was trying to do at the very beginning. I was given a referral to a vascular surgeon who was the one who said that I just had Nutcracker phenomenon, because we weren't quite sure if my symptoms fit with Nutcracker at that point. And at that point, my symptoms of SMAS and MALS were way more prominent. And I had even asked that surgeon, I'm like, okay, I have the measurements of SMAS, I have the symptoms, why am I not diagnosed? And he said, I don't know. And I felt very frustrated after that phone call, because he's a vascular surgeon. He should have been willing to make that call, especially because he agreed with every point that I was making about it, but he did not diagnose it, which is very frustrating. And so he was basically going to book me for a venogram to look into Nutcracker a little bit further. And then I also pushed for talking to someone, like a surgeon, about a celiac plexus block. And then there were a few other things that I had been pushing for as well. So even though my GI didn't agree with me, I kept pushing her, and she did end up sending me for an MRI/MRA. But the thing is, in my whole experience, is you're getting texts that don't know what they're looking for when it comes to compression symptoms. And if you don't know what you're looking for, you're going to assume everything is normal. And so proper breathing protocol was not necessarily followed in my testing, and so everything kept being considered normal. So at this point, we are in summer of 2024. I had my opinion for the celiac plexus block, and at that point, he just didn't feel comfortable doing it because I had lost so much weight, and he also didn't think that I had MALS based on the imaging that he had been sent, and clearly they just didn't know much about these compression syndromes. And at that point, I had no fight in me. I was so exhausted and burnt out on testing and getting images done and fighting for myself. And I felt like I was dying because I was so malnourished at this point. I could only tolerate a very small amount of liquid, so I was basically living off of tomato soup, which was homemade by my mom, because I could tolerate a couple spoonfuls of that. To kind of get my blood sugar up throughout the day, I would have spoonfuls of frosting, because I was trying to get something that was high fat, high calorie, in the smallest portion size that I possibly could. And to do that, it was peanut butter and frosting, because those two things, you only need a tablespoon and you're already up there in calories. And so I was just trying to do everything I could to survive. And during this time too, I was also fighting for a feeding tube. I had brought it up to my GI, who didn't feel that it was necessary, and also didn't know anybody who could place them, and she herself could not place them, and she could not admit me to her hospital either because she didn't have any beds. So I really was just being left on my own to figure this out. So at that point, I was so desperate that I started bringing it up to every single referral that I had been sent to. Every single one, because I knew that every referral would get back to my GI and she would know how serious I was about getting a feeding tube, and also how serious my situation was, because I don't think she fully believed me. And so every single referral I saw, I would mention that I believed that I needed a feeding tube, that I could not eat food, that I was tolerating only a small amount of liquids, and I had lost X amount of weight, and I was really, really struggling. At that point, I was bedbound, I was housebound, I was not even driving at that point, because I would have episodes of shaking, like uncontrollable shaking from really low blood sugar, and I felt unsafe to drive at that point because my brain fog was so bad from being so like malnourished. I was very, very thin at that point. I was buying kids clothes like from the kids section, and even those were too big on me, and I was really, really struggling. I could not walk far at all. Just taking my dog out to use the bathroom was a huge struggle, and I would immediately be back in bed after something like that, and my POTS was completely haywire. Like, I was dealing with very severe POTS, and all of these symptoms on top of that, I was in so much pain. I had burn marks across my abdomen from heating pad use because I was literally just in bed with a heating pad 24/7 in so much pain. And finally, I was given a referral to a GI who places feeding tubes. And I was like I took this appointment very seriously. I brought what I used as a soup bowl, which is, if you've ever gone to a restaurant and used a little sauce bowl, that was my soup bowl dish. And I made sure that he understood that that is what I tolerate every like 5 to 6 hours. It wasn't like, oh, I have this 1 hour and then I have this another hour. It was like every 5 to 6 hours, I maybe have 2 bites of soup, a bite of frosting, a bite of peanut butter, and that is my entire day. And I made sure that he understood that I was really struggling, and I could tell that he believed me, and he said yes to placing my feeding tube. And so a week after that, I was scheduled for my feeding tube placement surgery. So I have a GJ tube that was placed. I did have complications after that GJ tube placement because of malnourishment and EDS. I had very poor wound healing and ended up in the ER a couple days after placement because I was bleeding profusely. And it took me a really long time to heal from that surgery because the process to get set up with tube feeds was not linear here in my province, and I basically had to figure all that out myself as well, because the doctor who placed the tube kind of like ghosted me after that, and I haven't heard from him since my tube placement. And so I had to like try to figure out who was supposed to put in the order for my tube care, like supplies and formula. And so that whole time that I was recovering from my feeding tube surgery, I had no way of actually properly nourishing myself because I hadn't yet been called for getting my supplies or anything. So I basically went a month with a feeding tube but not feeding, and trying to take in the tiny amounts orally that I could handle. And so I'm going to give you a bit of a gauge at that point. At that point, I had lost like 35 pounds, I think-ish, and was down to like my lowest weight as an adult. And even like the weight that I was the weight that I was when I was like in 7th grade or something like that. I was so undernourished at that point. And I finally got the tube placed. I finally started on feeds a month after I got the surgery and started to feel so much better that I didn't have to force food into my stomach and that I was feeding into my intestine. I feel like that burst only lasted like a month, maybe. And then all of my symptoms continued to just be really bad. My diaphragm pain, my abdominal pain, the nausea. I was still really struggling. And I kept trying to push my GI on this subject to give me more referrals and to try to help her understand SMAS and MALS to begin with, because she just didn't really know much about them and kept wanting to say that I just had functional dyspepsia and hypersensitivity in my gut and constipation. And I knew that that was not what I was dealing with. And so at that point, I had been praying for like a long time. So fast forward to this year. I still didn't have answers as to why I ended up on a feeding tube. And even though I was pressing my doctors about that, they were okay to just be like, well, you have the feeding tube now, so we fixed it. Which they didn't fix it. They just helped me not to like die of starvation, basically. I was still struggling every single day. It was still affecting my day-to-day life, and they just didn't understand why I was still pushing this subject. So I had been following like a bunch of different support groups on Facebook and had done my research and decided to reach out to a surgeon in Spain because he did the testing himself. So I knew that I could go there, get proper testing by someone who knows what they're doing and knows what they're looking for, and get the answers that we needed to prove to my doctors here that I do have SMAS, I do have MALS, I do have Nutcracker, and to just help them understand why this was so important to me. I had even presented my GI doctor with 8 or 9 pages of research because she just didn't believe me. And so I started collecting my data. I started getting my imaging. Just as soon as I even got my imaging, I was like, how are they not seeing this? I could see all of the compressions on my own imaging, and I'm not a doctor. And so I was very frustrated at that point. Because it was very clear to me and evident to me on my scans that this is what we were dealing with, but it was just being missed by medical professionals. And so I knew that I was taking a step in the right direction by going to Spain. And so I collected all my data, all of my scans, all of my reports and everything. I had reached out to the surgeon in Spain, and I got in pretty fast. From the time that I had emailed, it was 2 months until that scheduled appointment. And my husband and I, we fundraised to be able to cover the costs of us going to Spain in the first place because we are not rich people, and without fundraising, we wouldn't have been able to go. And so we were very, very blessed by the community, by friends and family who helped us get to Spain by fundraising. And we saw the surgeon, and in the matter of 3 days, I was diagnosed with MALS, SMAS, Nutcracker, and Thurner. They were able to do all the tests and do everything that I've been requesting in 3 days when I had been waiting 3 years for my doctors here to do those things, which is crazy to me. And so now slowly I have been meeting with my team so that they know everything. I've so far met with my neurologist, and I've met with my family doctor, and I'm waiting to get in with my GI. I'm only supposed to see her in October, but I have requested a sooner appointment, so I'm waiting to hear back about that to figure out next steps. So to basically sum all of this up, the big point is you know your body best. You are your best advocate, and if you will not fight for you, who will? And you need to be willing to fight for yourself. You deserve the best care. And I had to change doctors in the middle of all of that because I was not being helped by my primary care. He was the worst out of all of my doctors, and he was causing a lot of PTSD and trauma, and turmoil within me during this experience, and I knew that I would not get anywhere if I continued to see him. The last straw was when I had requested to increase my IV fluids to once monthly to bi-weekly, and he yelled at me for it because he said that I should be getting it through my feeding tube and I didn't need it. And I did need it because I was not really tolerating liquids by mouth or liquids into my tube other than my tube feeds, which are already at a very slow rate. I have not been able to reach my goal rate of, I'm supposed to be feeding 12 hours a day, and I feed 20 to 22 hours a day because I do not tolerate it any faster than that. And ultimately, it was a really good call for me to switch doctors because I've had the best care by my primary care doctor now that I've switched. My new doctor is amazing, and she fully supports all of my endeavors, and she really does fight for me, and she wants me to just like live a life outside of the hospital. So she's willing to provide me with things that I need for that. So I recently got a PICC line because I just need more IV fluids. So we're going to weekly IV fluids, and she is full of ideas, and she's just amazing. And I hope that those of you out there who are struggling with your team are able to find doctors who believe you and support you, because I had to build that. I didn't start with that. I had to build that through being willing to ask for more referrals than what may have been deemed necessary. And I know not everybody is fortunate enough to have that, and I hurt for you. But I hope that you know that you should fight for yourself. And if you have like a gut feeling on something, do your research, pray about it, and then pursue that, because that's what I did, and that is how I got my diagnosis to begin with. Because if I wouldn't have fought for myself, and if I wouldn't have done my research, and if I wasn't praying for direction and for just for knowledgeable doctors and team members, I wouldn't be here right now, because I would have starved without this. And I just hope that you can fight for yourself. So we don't yet have the next steps, but I will update you as soon as I do have those next steps in place. I do struggle still with MALS, SMAS, Nutcracker type symptoms every single day. I don't yet know which symptoms are attributed to which compression, and I also don't know which ones go with Thurner so far, just because I have so much going on in my body. So I feel like once I start having surgeries, I'll be able to tell which compression is which as we relieve compressions. Something else that I wanted to touch on is, so for SMAS, a lot of doctors will start you off on a feeding tube, because the first step is to try to gain weight to see if you can regain the fat pad. So I wanted to share a little bit on that. So I've been on a feeding tube now for almost a year, and when I got my images done in Spain, they were able to see that my ankle has opened up. So anybody would probably say that my SMAS is cured, and that I don't have it anymore based on having a normal ankle. But my distance has decreased from what it originally was last year. It is now smaller than that. And I'm still having very active symptoms of SMAS. And so even though I have opened up the ankle, I have squashed down the distance. And so I'm still having very active symptoms of a compression. And I also show a compression on scans still, which would have been missed here in Canada. So I realized that I missed something pretty crucial. So now that I have a feeding tube, how am I doing, like, eating wise? So my feeding tube covers 100% of my calories. I do not actually need to eat anything by mouth if I don't want to, but it is encouraged to eat by mouth, specifically for my case, because you need to keep the stomach working, and to just see where things are at symptom-wise. And so I still do not tolerate much of anything by mouth. That is why I'm getting fluids, because I can only tolerate a couple sips of water during the day, and I try to have like a quarter cup of coffee every day, but I'm starting to struggle with that too, so that might be going away too. Food-wise, I do try different things. I tolerate liquid, like puree type things, better than solids. If I'm having something solid, it's like a bite. If I'm having a puree, I can have like 4 bites, like very tiny little bites, but that is about it. So food-wise, I'm still not tolerating much of anything, and and that's also how I know that the compression is still actively in place, is because I'm not tolerating food. So yeah, that's that. So, if that is you, just continue to fight. Get another opinion. Like, you don't have to take the first opinion that you're given, and that is my story, basically. I hope that it helps you on your diagnosis journey, and even though we may not have the same conditions, the same thing applies for all conditions across the board. You deserve the best care, and you should fight for yourself because you're worth it. I'm gonna close out this video here. Hello, it's Nikki of the future here, and I wanted to show you guys something that I have been working on. This is kind of in honor of finally getting my diagnosis, which was a long time coming, but I have a dream of making my own chronic illness merch, I guess, and just growing my small business, Ottoman Burlap. Right now I sell 2B sets, and I'm hoping in the future to maybe include pick line covers as well, but we'll see. But something that is coming to Ottoman Burlap is some merch. So this, don't mind that it's all wrinkly, I need to wash them. This is the MALS awareness. I designed these myself, and here is the SMAS awareness. So they are just simple designs, but you gotta start somewhere, and I'm very happy with them. So I will be announcing when those will be launching soon. So keep your eyes out, that will be on Ottoman Burlap. I did only purchase a very small stock just to start, because I don't really anticipate it to be the most popular item in my store, and that's okay. But if you do have these conditions and you are looking for an awareness shirt, I would love to support you by providing chronic illness merch. And if there is an awareness shirt that you would like to see in my store, just let me know and I will start designing something. Don't forget to give this video a like, and if you would like to continue to follow my journey, I would love to have you, and you can do that by subscribing down below. I post every Thursday, so I'll see you guys next week. Bye!